Welcome to Mainline Bait's Carp Fishing TV, and you're joining me on the banks of the Carp Society's Horseshoe Lake. In this film, I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for fishing in the spring, and as you can see, tip number 2 is already working really well. Tip number 1 for carp fishing in the spring would be to consider the depth that you're fishing at. Now, as you move through autumn into winter, I naturally think the fish start to go deeper as the water cools. Now, in spring, I'm thinking the opposite of that. You've had the really cold times through January and February, and as you get into March, the sun starts to climb higher in the sky, and you'll notice even on a frosty, freezing cold morning, that when the sun does come out, you really start to feel the power of its rays for the first time of the year. Now, obviously the fish are cold-blooded, they're living in freezing cold water, and one of the main things that they really want is to be warm so that they can get more energy and move around the lake that bit more, you know. So with that in mind, in the winter, I'm not really looking in the trees, I'm not really looking in the corners. I'm sort of thinking about open water fishing a lot of the time. Now, in March, you know, this is the time when the sun comes out on the back of the wind where there can be a real noticeable difference in temperature. You know, you can be on the end of the wind, it can feel freezing, like it's cutting you in half, and you can be on the back of the wind in the sun, and you can be in a t-shirt. Now, the carp will notice that on a lot of venues, and it is really worth in the middle of the day when you don't think you're going to catch anything, when it's not what you would call your traditional bite times, to get your Polaroids, have a little look round, walk out onto trees, look in the margins, because you might just stumble on some fish, you know, particularly reed beds. You know, they're absolute carp magnets in the spring, particularly in April as you move a little bit further into spring. So my top tip for number 1 for the spring is to really consider the depth and really consider the conditions and try and pick your spots and where you're fishing in line with what depth that you think the fish would be. And that leads us nicely into tip number 2. Okay then, tip number 2, and piggybacking off of tip number 1, and that is zig rigs. Now for me, you'd think, or you might think, that zigs are at their best during the summer months when the lake or the water temperature is at its warmest. But for me, zigs are their absolute best in March and April. And that's because when you get those first sunny days of the year, you know, the water is naturally warming from the surface down, and that means that the upper layers of the water will be much more comfortable for the carp to sit in. And being cold-blooded, they like to move around in those upper layers, and especially so out in open water over deep water, so they're not on the bottom. You can often see them jumping in lakes that are 10, 12, 14 foot deep and think, oh, they're absolutely having it. You might put a single hook bait out there, you might put some bait out, and just not be getting the action that you think you should for the levels of activity that you're seeing. And that is where zig rigs come into their own. You know, if they're moving around, I found, obviously it's a trial and error thing, but for me, I've always done best sort of 4, 5, 6, 7 foot down, you know, that sort of bracket, you know, moving around in that layer. You can catch them deeper, and obviously you can catch them higher, but March and April, 4 to 7 foot below the surface is a great starting point. My favourite colour hook bait is black when the water is clear, and if there's a bit of a sort of coloration in the water, then I prefer something bright like a yellow. But yeah, if you're seeing them jump over deep water, you're not getting action on your bottom rods, on your overbaited patches as such, then my next port of call would be the zig rig, because it really does help you to target the upper layers where it's most warm. Okay, let me talk you through exactly how I set my zig rig up, starting with the hook bait. I've got the small pellet-shaped zigger on there. It's super sweet, and I've got that tipped with a little yellow extender stop for a little fleck of colour. The hook is a size 8 barbless wide gape, and that's knotless knotted with a small piece of 0.7 silicone pushed over the eye just to keep the angle of the hook link coming out at the desired angle. And the actual material itself is the 8-pound korda cruiser. It's 0.28 in diameter, and it's a little bit sturdier than your traditional zig fishing line, which when you're fishing in weedy situations for big carp, just gives you that little bit more confidence. And the next and final most important part of any zig rig is the lead system, or what you would call your anti-tangle system. Now, I've got an anti-tangle sleeve over the eye of the swivel, got my hybrid leg clip, tail rubber, and a small length of tubing, maybe 2 inches, just coming out the back of there, and that just keeps the hook link away from the main line during the cast. And that is exactly what I'm going to do now. Right then, to sum up how the session is going until this point. Now, sunny day yesterday, freezing cold night, frosty this morning, and a bite about 8, 9 o'clock this morning. Now, nothing since then. I've seen a fish jump, come out 3 times where I've got one of my zigs, and I'm trying to sort of work out in my mind why I haven't caught any more, you know. And the first thing, obviously it's been really, really warm today as a general rule. After that frost, the sun's been high. It's been pretty much flat calm out there, most of the water. So there's a potential that the fish are higher in the water than my zigs are. So the potential that I need to perhaps raise the height of my zigs. And perhaps the only reason that I caught one at first light when it was coldest was because they dropped down to that level. Now it's really hard to say without any proof, and I think the only way to prove that's right or that it's wrong is to perhaps try firstly a higher zig, but secondly maybe put some bait out and try fishing on the bottom. So yeah, I've made up a bucket of bait. I'm not going to put it out tonight. I'm going to stick to my guns because there's fish out there over the 3 rods at the moment. I'm going to hang fire on the zigs, but if it doesn't produce, yeah, I'm going to make a change. I'll probably keep 1 or 2 on zigs and either 1 or 2 on some bait. But for now, we'll let it play out. We'll see what happens, and tomorrow there could be changes ahead. Right then, a pretty quiet night, or should I say a very quiet night. No bleeps, no nothing. Did think I heard fish jumping out there in the night, and but for whatever reason it hasn't happened, which I think leads us on to tip number 3 quite well. Now, tip number 3 is not to throw the kitchen sink at it from the get-go. And what I mean by that is, you know, often on Dating lakes I see this, and on a lot of venues I see this, is people arrive into a swim, there's fish out there, they start throwing the marker rod out there time and time again, they then spot a hell of a load of bait out there, and then the fish are gone and there's not really any room to make adjustments. And if you've piled in the bait from the get-go and you've scared the fish off, you know, it doesn't matter what you do from that point. You know, if the fish aren't there, you cannot catch them. So the tip is go in lightly, try not to scare the fish off, and leave yourself room to make adjustments. And I think what I'm going to do at this point is the zigs have had a chance, I've had a bite on them, but you know, I don't feel like I'm getting the result that I want. So I'm going to have a little lead up with the marker rod, as subtly as I can, only one spot, and I'm going to go in with a little bit of bait, and we'll see if that can induce a different reaction, which that leads us on to tip number 4, which is my bait mix for the spring, and we'll show you that now. Right then, tip number 4, and that is bait choice for spring. Now, much like winter, the water is still quite cold, and I don't think it's the time for applying loads of whole boilies into your swim. You know, you overfeed them really quickly, and the chances are that they're not going to be going through kilos and kilos and kilos of bait. Now, for that reason, I've gone in for a highly visual mix that's absolutely packed with attraction and got a really high water content as well. So the thinking is it's visible, it's going to draw their attention in clear water, in sort of slightly coloured water, they're going to see it really easily. But at the same time, when they come in and start eating it, it's not going to fill them up. And secondly, obviously, it's packed, absolutely packed with attraction. Now, to make this mix, the first thing that you need to do is crumb down some boilies. My choice is the cell. I've got the 15mm shelf life, not shelf life, frozen cell, but you could definitely use essential cell if you wanted to. Once I've got that down into sort of a fine powder, I do keep some sort of like 3/4, half boilies, you know, it's not all powder, you know, so I transfer a little bit from the top of the Ridge Monkey grinder back into the bucket, so you've got a few different sizes. And then I add some sweet corn. It does help if you can get the massive catering tins, you know, to get it at the right price. You know, you can go to Aldi and buy like the small sort of 50p tins, but obviously you can be lucking around a load of rubbish, you can have loads of empty tins in your swim. So if you can get down to your local cash and carry, get a big tin like that, it's certainly really useful. And then the final bit of the mix, oh no, not the final bit, but the second from last bit, is the 10mm boilies. I do like a few 10mm boilies in there, and the reason for having 10mm boilies is I want something like hook bait like. If you're using a boilie on the hook, you know, it's nice to have the odd whole boilie in the mix, getting the fish used to picking them up. And that finally is the Smart Liquid. Now, I've become a massive fan of the Smart Liquid over the last 2 years. And in the beginning, you know, you think, what is it doing for me? Is it a bit of a gimmick? But because I've caught so many fish in the last few years using it, I'm just building and building and building more confidence. And when you're having big hits, catching loads of fish, you really know that they enjoy eating it. Now, my preferred way to use a Smart Liquid is to dissolve it into the water. You know, you'll see some people squirt it in on the top of the bait, allow it to dry onto the bait, but I really want to sort of saturate the bait in it, and I do that by squirting the Smart Liquid into a bucket or a small tub, dissolving it as best I can in some lake water, and then applying that to the bait. Now, you can use the Cell Smart Liquid. This time around I've gone for the sweet corn, but I think either or is a great choice. And the real key benefits of doing the Smart Liquid in this way is, firstly, it saturates the boilie crumb, which makes it sink really well. It makes it less prone to drawing on odours from the lake bed. and it makes sure that your whole bucket of bait is singing from the same like hymn sheet as you like. So yeah, Smart Liquid, Cell or the sweet corn, both really good. I've left that overnight and it is what I would call Optimus Prime. So yeah, enough chatter. Let's put some out there. Oh, she's not looking good. Oh, she is. Now, this spot, I actually cast the marker float on it on the first day, and when I was checking the depth, I just noticed that the bottom was gravelly. It's a real short, like I was just on it by pure luck, and it was off the gravel really quickly. And I've just interrogated it pretty extensively with the leading rod, and at 23.5 wraps towards his bivvy door and fractionally left, it is gravel. It's a small patch. It's sort of patchy with a little bit of weed round it, but yeah, looks like as good a place as any, and a nice place to put 2 naked chods. Top tip number 5 for fishing in the spring, and that would be to use bright pop-ups. Now, every year, without fail, thousands and thousands of carp all over Europe will fall to bright pop-ups. Now, they suit a whole host of applications and a whole host of different rigs. You can obviously fish them on spinner rigs over bait. You can obviously fish them on sort of real basic pop-up rigs. You can fish them on chods and stiff hinges, and they will all work. And obviously, coming out of winter, the fish are sort of just having a little move around the lake, and something bright that captures their attention, you know, can be all that it takes to get that sort of reaction and a fish to pick up your bait. Now, another thing that's worth mentioning is the lake beds can be quite bare, and particularly on low stock venues, not just low stock venues, but on many venues, a single pop-up can be absolutely deadly when cast to some activity. So you've seen a show, you're not catching anything, it can pay to cast a hook bait to that fish, feel for a drop on a rig like the Naked Chod that presents and leaves your hook bait fishing sort of on top of any minimal debris. That can be all that you need to catch in the spring. Now, this version of the Naked Chod, I fished it over bait, I fished it over as a single, and it served me very, very well since sort of 2008, 2009 when I first started using it. And to construct this rig, the first thing that you need to do is thread a no trace bead up the main line. Take it sort of 12 to 14 inches up the line. The next thing you do is thread a size 11 PTFE ring swivel onto the main line, and then the following part is to spread on what is called the line saver bead. They look like a little witch's hat. So the swivel can run between these two beads at a fixed distance apart. The next thing that you do is thread on what is your heli safe, and then attach your chosen lead. I've got a 3.5 ounce distance lead on this occasion. Now, that's the lead system set up, and the hook link is the most important part, like the chod section. Now, the rest of it stays on, and you just change this part as and when the hook goes blunt. And all you need to do is take, in my case, I've got a size 4 barbless wide gape. Take a small piece of 20-pound mouth trap. I'll just knot that to the hook using a 6 or 7 turn knot. I then place a small rig ring on the tag end, take that back through the eye of the hook, pull it tight and blob it, leaving it sort of with about 3 or 4 mil gap. So you've got a nice small D. And then the last thing to do is to take that through the eye of the size 11 ring swivel, roughly 15 mil between the eye of the hook and the eye of the swivel, fold it over, a 1 turn blood knot, apply a little bit of moisture to it, and then take the 2 puller tools, one on the hook, one in the ring swivel, and just gently pull them apart to secure the knot. Trim your tag end, and then wrap around a small amount of the dark matter putty just to balance the pop-up. And you want that to sink ever so slowly so it comes to rest on any sort of low-lying debris that is on the bottom. Moving on to the hook bait. In this case, I've got the super buoyant yellow cell pop-ups on. And firstly, to get that onto the micro ring swivel, you take a small piece of the bait floss, thread that through the small rig ring and take both tag ends to one side. You take your baiting needle and go through the centre of the pop-up, draw the 2 tag ends through the bait and push the pop-up right up against the small rig ring. Trim yourself a 5 to 10 mil tag and using a lighter, blob the end of the floss down tight to the edge of the bait and rub your lighter on that to create what is technically a bait stop. And obviously I've gone for yellow here. Yellow matches the corn that is in my mix. The smell coming from the pop-up, the cell, is matching the boilie that I've chosen to fish over. And obviously if you want to use something else, there's a whole host. You know, you've got pineapple pop-ups, you've got tutti frutti pop-ups, everything that you could ever wish to imagine. But there you have it. There's my naked shod. It suits fishing over bait. It suits being cast towards fish that have jumped and possibly any other activity that you might see. And a very, very effective rig at this time of year. Right then, moving in to what is the final night of our session here at Horseshoe Lake. And I don't know whether to be confident or not really. I've not seen any fish since yesterday afternoon, so I'm not sure if they're still about, but change of tactics, spotted up area with the 2 naked shods over that corn and boilie crumb mix. So that's something new that we haven't done until now. And I've also still got one out on the zig. Now, failing catching anything this evening, I've still had a great time, obviously caught a fish, but more than that, the sun's been shining and it's just felt, I don't know, just those first few rays of spring, you know, the heat on your body, the heat on your face, and I'm really, really looking forward to the weeks ahead. Right then, we have come to the end of what has been a super enjoyable session here at Horseshoe Lake. Really pleased to have finally broken my duck. I've never caught one from this lake previously, so super happy in that and energised for the weeks that lay ahead. Now, I really hope that the tips that I've given you help you catch some more fish this spring, and I'm sure that if you apply them in the right way, they certainly will. And if you don't already, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Mainline Baits YouTube channel. And lastly, I'll be doing a few more films for Mainline this year, so stay tuned, I'll be back.